that they may be reconsidering the launch timeline or business model for this. Nothing. Radio silence. But you got to imagine that everyone is in crisis meetings right now because Sony dropped a packet on this, and there's every reason to suspect this is going to launch with a max player count of a few hundred people, as the fear of a self-fulfilling prophecy stops people from laying down the $40 needed to purchase this video game. I've said it before, but I'll say it again now. I really think Concord needs a big chunky delay. I think the game is not ready for launch and it would benefit from more dev time. Most importantly, I think the business model is not fit for purpose, and if this is ever going to have a shot, then a pivot to free-to-play feels almost essential at this point. I really want Concord to succeed because honestly, I like what I played and I think it deserves to do well. I think there's a real chance that this could find a community of people who are into this, and if Sony are willing to underwrite it for a few years, it could grow the same way that like Sea of Thieves did for Microsoft or Fallout 76 did for Bethesda. There's a foundation here that's worth sticking with, so I hope Sony are willing to pump the brakes on this launch timeline, give Firewalk some more time to make some big changes, and maybe we all get ourselves a shiny new hero shooter to be excited about in 2025. It's a long shot, but hey, I'm ever the optimist. Speaking of live services that went from pretty rough to industry leading, Digital Extremes held their annual TennoCon this past week. Your boy was invited, but sadly I couldn't get over to beautiful London, Canada, as I'm making the trip to Gamescom very soon, so I couldn't justify the trip. But a lot of other people went and they had a blast. Two big ticket items during the show. The first was a deep dive look at Warframe 1999, a new experience coming to the game toward the back end of the year. I originally thought this would be just a standalone one and done thing, but DE say that this is actually the beginning of a whole new way to play Warframe. Quote, featuring characters, enemies, weapons, and vehicles that are both thrilling and strangely familiar, this is Warframe like you've never experienced it before, end quote. As for the 22-minute gameplay deep dive, it looked pretty sick, finding an art style that marries Warframe's weird, bulbous futurism with something that feels grounded in the late 90s setting. It also has a romance system, a first for the series, and voicing these romanceable characters is a veritable who's who of voice talent from games like Baldur's Gate 3 to Final Fantasy 14 to Cyberpunk and more. It really does feel like an incredibly ambitious enlarging of the game, and I for one am always glad to see how willing DE are to take risks. Not all of them pay off, mind you, but it keeps Warframe feeling fresh nearly a decade after it was first released, and that is no small feat. The other thing showcased during TennoCon was a proper look at DE's first new game since Warframe. I'm referring of course to Soulframe, and no, it is not a Souls-like, a point the dev team apparently agonized over when naming this thing. It is instead a third-person melee action game that takes its cues from more generalist action games than Souls-likes, and also from Warframe itself, since this one will be a free-to-play game, and you get the feeling that at least some of the progression and monetization stuff will be lifted and dropped from Warframe. So during the show, DE showed 17 minutes of gameplay, some impressive art design and a great setting here, but when it came to the combat side of things, it got a little wonky.
This is the original.
Take a look.
This is the original. It's just they cut it down in the video. This is the superior version. Very good.
So this trailer on YouTube has about a 50% dislike ratio at this point, and it's not difficult to guess why. This is a melee action game where the melee combat looks bad. Like, let's be real, the animation work here feels almost placeholder, and if it is placeholder, then it just feels like a thoroughly bad idea to show it because it seriously upset the narrative around Soulframe. A game that people were really excited about given Warframe's veteran dev team are working on this, but now a lot of that excitement has turned to confusion and or concern as this trailer gave little cause for optimism. It is important to keep in mind that the game is in development and surely this combat will improve, but it feels like it has a long way to go, and this game releases into open beta in a few months' time. Much like Warframe itself, it seems like DE are going to be building the air.
Hello, forgetful granny. How are you?
Second time. One last tidbit from TennoCon: Soulframe game director and DE CEO Steve Sinclair took an interview with VGC. Man, that's a lot of acronyms. Anyway, in it, he publicly mused about the quick fate that befalls many newly launched live service games. Quote, they think the release is make or break, and it's not. They have a financial way to be persistent, and they never do it.
I'm making Gollum.
Doesn't work, and they throw it away. Isn't that a shame when you put so many years of your life into iterating on those systems and building technology or building the start of a community, and because the operation costs are high, you get terrified when you see the numbers drop and you leave. We've seen this with amazing releases that I think have massive potential, and I think they eject too soon, end quote. It's an interesting comment to make given that last year Digital Extremes did exactly what Sinclair is describing to Wayfinder, an MMO light looter shooter developed by Airship Syndicate but published by DE. Wayfinder had a disastrous launch, but it definitely had a lot of potential.
I like your emotes, forgetful granny.
November last year, leaving Airship with no way to continue live service or even online support. Rather heroically, Airship managed to really turn things around, actually made Wayfinder an offline game, pulling out all of the in-game spending stuff and enabling peer-to-peer multiplayer, and now it's 84% very positive on Steam, up from lows of like 20% around the time of launch, or even a mixed 50% once the game managed to find its feet a few months after that. A great result for Airship here after being left in the lurch by DE. Incidentally, we reached out to Airship for their response to Sinclair's comments about how live service games are too quickly abandoned, and an Airship representative had this to say, quote, "We agree that we are proud of what we achieved converting Wayfinder to a co-op action RPG. We think it's a better game for it, and looking at our Steam reviews, our players agree," end quote. Good on them, I say. Pivoting now to Microsoft news, you guys remember that Game Pass price hike and service offering change up from a few weeks back? Long story short, the price of Game Pass went up across the board, and a newly added standard tier will no longer have day one new release games. You'll need to front for the ultimate tier to get those on console, or the Game Pass on PC tier if it's your preferred platform. A little bit of pushback on this one, but not too much, to be honest with you. And I suspect the reason for that is something that I discussed on the podcast when we were all talking about it together. $20 a month for a massive back catalogue of older games, a healthy smattering of day one new releases, including AAA releases like Indiana Jones and Call of Duty and Doom Dark Ages, plus you get xCloud allowing you to play games on basically any device with a screen. That seems like a pretty good-ish deal. It doesn't feel like Microsoft had taken us for a ride, at least not yet. A few more price hikes, then sure, absolutely. But at 20 big ones, it feels broadly reasonable given how much you're getting in return. I may feel that way, but the US FTC certainly does not. The FTC's had a bee in their bonnet about Microsoft ever since the Activision Blizzard acquisition process began, and when the FTC achieved basically none of their stated goals, they committed themselves to remaining a thorn in Microsoft's side. Case in point, this week the FTC filed concern over the Game Pass price hike, arguing that it was a degraded product and it contradicted Microsoft's earlier promise of no price hikes relating to the acquisition. Of course, that is an easy sidestep for Microsoft because they can just argue that the price hike isn't because of the acquisition, but other factors. Sure enough, Microsoft responded to the claims being like, nuh-uh, and honestly, they have a very strong case, so it's highly unlikely that the FTC are going to get anywhere with this one. Sticking with Microsoft a while longer, the Xbox marketing lead for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Michael Flatt, took an interview with a publication called Marketing Week, and I bet he wished he hadn't. There he gave a rather frank admission about Microsoft's commitment to those regions. Quote, "We adopt what I would call a more fiscally responsible approach to media investments. We're not blessed with huge media budgets, so we have to be quite scrappy really, and quite tenacious to fight for funds that probably go somewhere else," end quote. It's a surprising admission because it comes from an actual Xbox employee in a position to know, and it suggests that Microsoft does not invest properly in these regions. This has long been speculated, most recently by Tom Warren of The Verge, when people got very mad at him recently when he reported that Microsoft were planning to wind back their investment in Europe, essentially vacating the field so they could focus more on the US. That is an unconfirmed report, but you do have Xbox's actual EMEA head confirming that compared to Sony, the money faucet here is set to trickle rather than spray. One last piece of Microsoft news, and it's a good one. They cancelled that god-awful Halo TV show. I know we shouldn't celebrate when things like games, TV shows, or movies get canned, but this show was so unbelievably bad, like horrendously bad on every level, with absolutely no respect for the source material whatsoever. It feels like a relic of a bygone era where the showrunners somehow thought that they knew better than the game makers and fans that brought this franchise to where it was. Like, you think you know something Shigeru Miyamoto didn't? Whoever it was that directed the 1994 Super Mario Bros. Movie? Wait, who was that anyway? Anna Jankel and Rocky Morton. Huh, okay. Suffice it to say, that movie was not great for their careers, hence the fact that we never heard from them ever again. Again, we are getting sidetracked. Point is, the Halo TV show has not been renewed by Paramount, and given the significant production costs for it and the overwhelming negative feedback from Halo fans and casual audiences, this one seems as donezo as Reach itself. Variety are reporting that Xbox and Amblin TV do want to shop this around a bit. Hopefully they find someone willing to back a Halo TV project on the condition that it is a full reboot that pretends like this original series 1 and 2 never even existed. If you go full Men in Black memory flash on this one, I will be on board. A quick lightning round to finish off, and this one's a nice segue coming off that Halo TV story. While that's getting canned, the Fallout TV show is drowning in Emmy nominations. Got 16 nominations last week, including Outstanding Drama Series and Best Actor for our main man and Walton Goggins. It is unlikely the show is going to bring home many of those 16 nominations, but hey, it's nice to be considered. And honestly, it's a great show, so it's fantastic to see it get this sort of recognition. The review bombing for Apex Legends is going swimmingly. Recently, EA announced some truly horrendous changes coming to the Battle Pass, effectively doubling the cost of it and removing the ability to earn it for free in-game. As a result, consumers utilize one of the few tools at their disposal, Steam reviews. The game currently sits at an overwhelmingly negative 8% on Steam, with 70,000 reviews in the past 30 days alone. I often get shit for being broadly in support of review bombing because, yeah, it can be misused for bad faith shit, absolutely. But most of the time, it's consumers rightly calling out bullshit and hopefully hurting a company's bottom line whilst doing so. No response from EA or Respawn to any of this yet, so it looks like they are going to try and grit their teeth and bear it. Let's see how long that lasts. The First Ascendant has removed its clearly plagiarized icons ripped straight from Destiny 2. In the patch notes, the game director penned a little missive saying, quote, "The First Ascendant has been developed with deep affection and respect for various looter shooters, and we take feedback regarding other similar games very seriously. Through this hotfix, we are trying to reflect the unique identity of the First Ascendant. We will continue to improve this game for fans of the genre," end quote. Man really went out of his way not to say the words Destiny 2 in that. Good job. You have no idea how over it had to be for us to be this back. That is the general vibe in the Team Fortress community right now, who are feeling buoyant after Valve effected a massive banning spree intended to get rid of all the game-ruining bots. It coincides with a summer update mostly consisting of community-made maps, items, and hats. As a result, not only have reviews shot back up to very positive after hitting like mostly negative just a few months ago, but the player count is averaging around 100,000 concurrent players. That's literally 100 Concords. Damn, man, that feels really harsh. Moving right along, some good and bad news for Warner Brothers, maybe, I don't know. The studio that made Multiversus has just been acquired by Warner Brothers. That's a great sign that the game is doing well and that Warner Brothers have high hopes for its future. Probably a little concerning for the developers who now find themselves under the employ of the fickle and mercurial David Zaslav.
You've never heard this part?
For those people, at least.
This is
very much a
this is the point of the song.
It's a 50 staff who are working at NetherRealm Studios, makers of Mortal Kombat and Injustice
अभी
games.
कुछ कही season फिर the song makes sense
To multiple
after
LinkedIn
the
posts.
last
NetherRealm apparently
season.
shuttered their entire mobile team, which is reported to be around 50 people. Those numbers are not confirmed, and we've reached out to Warner Brothers for comment, but we haven't heard back at the time of recording. NetherRealm ran 3 live service mobile games, but now that's down to just 2: Mortal Kombat Mobile and Injustice Mobile. I'll survive, but Mortal Kombat Onslaught will be shut down very soon. That's sort of like an RPG spin on the Mortal Kombat universe, and as of October of this year, it will be no more. That does neatly segue us into some good labor news. Staff at Bethesda Game Studios are unionizing, and it's not just a handful of people in 1 or 2 teams or whatever, it's over 230 staff, making it the first wall-to-wall union within any Microsoft-owned entity. The staff put out a statement saying, quote, "Joining in solidarity with our fellow members at ZeniMax Workers, 1BGS, and all of CWA Union, we push for increased job security, compensation transparency, and flexibility to continue creating the games we love. As we work towards our first contract with Microsoft, we hope you'll join us in voicing your support as we serve as an example for all into the next era of game development," end quote. Microsoft has recognized the union, so hopefully this helps protect Bethesda staff from the sort of cruel and needless job cuts that corporate leaders love to dish out whenever the angle of the line isn't steep enough. Some quick sales data to top you off. You Americans are crazy about your college football. EA Sports College Football saw 2.2 million players during its early access release alone. These people had to pay $100 to get into that early access, by the way, and there were 2.2 million of these people. Absolutely insane. Mind you as well, this game is only available on current gen consoles, so no last gen consoles and no PC. Just absolutely wild. Speaking of big numbers, the Overwatch franchise just hit over 100 million lifetime players. Obviously, going free to play would have bolstered that significantly. We all like to joke that Overwatch is dead, because let's be real, it's a funny joke. But the reality is that Overwatch is still very much alive. On Steam alone, it's averaging 45,000 peak concurrent players each day, and that's just on Steam, when surely most people playing Overwatch are playing through Battle.net, and that doesn't even include console numbers. Overwatch may have lost a lot of its brand cash from the years past, but it's still going strong, and with numbers like that, you can expect Microsoft to stick with it for many years to come. And yes, it felt just as weird to say that as it did for you to hear it. And finally, Ubisoft held an earnings call, and apparently they're in pretty good shape. 15% increase in sales driven largely by live service revenue. Interestingly, console revenue still accounts for around 50% of Ubi's total revenue, an important metric to keep in mind whenever we're talking about PC player counts for various games. X-Defiant defiantly hit 10 million players despite the tough task of going head-to-head with Call of Duty, so that's a solid enough result. The Crew Motorfest is apparently doing pretty well too, no doubt helped by the fact that Ubisoft turned off the service for the original Crew, so that community really had no choice if they wanted to keep playing the game. Hell, even Skull and Bones is doing well, maybe, apparently, if you believe what Ubisoft says. They say that average revenue per user is strong, but they stop short of how many users there are. So if there are like 15 people playing this game, but each one of them are buying a season pass, then Ubisoft is chalking that one up as a win. Speaking of Ubi, one piece of news that broke overnight, Ubisoft has issued a statement on the criticisms that Assassin's Creed Shadow has been getting about its treatment of history. It's a long story to properly recount, but basically some people, including Japanese people, take exception to presenting one of the game's protagonists, the African-born Yosuke, as a samurai, when the historical record on his status does not definitively specify that he was in fact a samurai. Some historians argue that he was, others argue that it's unlikely or at least unclear. There have also been some issues with things like architecture and hairstyles and etiquette and more, where Japanese people have pointed out that Ubisoft's attention to detail on those things has been poor. Ubisoft's statement makes clear that Assassin's Creed games are not trying to be accurate reflections of history, but rather historically inspired fiction, which yeah, is true, since AC games have always taken plenty of creative license with their treatment of historical figures and events. However, Ubisoft did apologize at one point in the statement, saying, quote, "We acknowledge that some elements of our promotional materials have caused concern within the Japanese community. For this, we sincerely apologize," end quote. This part very likely refers to an incident where Ubisoft used the flag of a historical reenactment society without their consent, with the group demanding that Ubisoft remove the flag from a collector's edition art book of the game, a demand that Ubisoft eventually acquiesced to. Ubisoft say they'll continue to evolve the game during development, but didn't confirm what changes they'll be making. I'm sure we'll continue to hear plenty more about all this stuff in the lead up to launch. So what got announced or delayed this week? Well, EVO 24 happened in Las Vegas, the biggest EVO tournament ever in terms of number of participants, showing that the fighting scene is doing pretty damn well. A raft of fighting game announcements dropped during the course of the event, like Multiversus Season 2, which adds Samurai Jack and Beetlejuice for some reason. Guilty Gear Strive is getting its first ever guest character, and it's a pretty damn good one, Lucy from the Cyberpunk Edge Runners anime. Not bad at all. Somehow, Hayashi returned, announced as the third DLC fighter for Tekken 8. This guy just can't stay dead, it seems. Street Fighter 6 released a gameplay trailer for Terry Bogard, the SNK crossover character who will join the Street Fighter 6 roster in the near future. Speaking of Street Fighter, Victor Punk Woodley delivered the first ever win in EVO history for someone hailing from the United States. That's 20 years of Street Fighter at EVO, and this is the first US win. Big congrats to Punk for that one. Moving on to non-fighting game announcements now. Back in the day, there was a series of games called Chibi Robo. They were on the GameCube, Wii, DS, and 3DS, and it was a household-based 3D action series with plenty of charm. The team behind that series didn't hold the rights to it, so they reformed under a new banner, and they've committed to making a spiritual successor, which they're calling Co-Robo. This one is very early on. In fact, it's just a Kickstarter right now, so if you're at all interested in getting in on the ground floor and helping this team out, you can sling them a few bucks to help them get on their way. A new Devolver game appears. This one is called Force Strike, and it's a sort of puzzle combat game where you can plan out your fights by doing kind of like mock battles in your head before committing to the real thing. I've played a few games like this in the past, like that John Wick game and Fights in Tight Spaces. They're always a good time, and this one has a simple but effective pixel art style that's really working. No day for this one yet, but it's arriving sometime in 2025. Biggest announcement for the week is almost certainly Splitgate 2. Now, this is a really interesting one. The original Splitgate launched and went absolutely nowhere for the longest time until suddenly it got picked up by some streamers, and then we were off to the races, with the title amassing some 22 million downloads after that. This all happened before the games industry started to contract, at a time when investor money was freely flowing. As such, the dev team behind Splitgate raised a boatload of cash, and with that in hand, they then said they'd be ceasing updates on Splitgate 1 so they could focus on making Splitgate 2. They wanted to take the game to a whole new level, so they effectively let Splitgate 1 die so that Splitgate 2 might live. They've now just officially revealed Splitgate 2. It was just a cinematic trailer here, so no actual gameplay, but they did confirm a 2025 release date. I don't know about this one, man. I worried that the decision to drop the first game was kind of hastily made. Yeah, this one will be an Unreal Engine 5, but people didn't play Splitgate for the graphics. They played it because it was fun. Let's hope the franchise hasn't lost too much momentum, since it does feel like the market has shifted considerably since the salad days of 2019. Finally, the team behind Orcs Must Die are back at it with Orcs Must Die Death Trap. This is the 5th game in the series, so people are obviously buying them. If you're unfamiliar, it's a very competent tower defense game, and the latest entry is adding 4-player co-op supported by matchmaking, which is a nice addition. No date for this yet, but it is out sometime next year. One delay announcement this week, and it's for Ubisoft's upcoming mobile release, or at least some of them. Rainbow Six Mobile and The Division Resurgence are like one-to-one ports of the main games that they're based on, but they're of course mobile games. I actually played The Division Resurgence, and I can confirm that, yeah man, they really nailed getting The Division onto a phone to a degree that I was kind of a little bit stunned by. I expect the in-game spending will be horrendous because that's how it is with all mobile games, but from a gameplay perspective, yeah, it was very solid, absolutely no doubt about it. Anyway, these were intended to release sometime this year, but Ubisoft has now delayed both of them to sometime in 2025. So what came out last week? Well, quite an interesting slate of releases actually. Kicking things off is Bow Path of the Teal Lotus. It's a lovely looking 2.5D action platformer inspired by Japanese mythology. This one landed really well, 82% very positive on Steam and a mighty 84 on OpenCritic. GameRant loved this one, scoring at 4.5 stars and saying, quote, "But for those exhausted by drawn-out AAA experiences, Bow's lean nature might just be a breath of fresh air. Ultimately, when the most significant criticism someone can make about a game is that there isn't enough of it, that ought to be taken as a fairly good sign. If you have even a passing interest in the Metroidvania or platforming genres, Bow Path of the Teal Lotus is not a game you can afford to miss," end quote. Dungeons of Hinterberg was another very promising looking indie title, and it too delivered in spades. 91% very positive on Steam at the moment, and a strong 80 on OpenCritic. PC Gamer scored this one an 84, it was quite a high score for them, and they said of it, quote, "A game that's satisfyingly complex despite its outward simplicity. The strict time division of days allows for a comfortable balance between social elements and exploration, and combat's occasional monotony is easy to ignore with so many fun puzzles and beautiful environments," end quote. Really like what Rock Paper Shotgun had to say about it in their positive write-up, quote, "There's a climactic rush at the end of the game's 20-hour runtime, but for the majority, Dungeons of Hinterberg is wonderfully laid back. There are so many games that romanticize leaving your busy life and escaping to the wilderness, but here the topic is explored in an authentic and genuine way. There's a lesson here about how rest is fundamental to health and happiness, but I also love how the game communicates that. It's a gentle, reflective fantasy adventure that'll have you reaching for your hiking boots," end quote. Don't forget this one is out on Game Pass if you would like to give it a try. So too is Flintlock, The Siege of Dawn actually, but the reception to that one has not been as strong. It's sitting at a mostly positive 74% on Steam, and critics are even more down on it, putting it at a fair 70 on OpenCritic. Not a lot of variance in the scores here, with most outlets being at a 6 or 7, like Press Start, who scored at a 6 and said, quote, "With the notable exception of Flintlock's wobbly combat fundamentals, there isn't much in here that is experience-breaking so much as consistently underwhelming. The cultural touchstones used to give Kayan life can lead to some truly inventive visual touches as you explore settlements and discover increasingly gaudy armor sets, but when it all loops back into fairly rote, poorly communicated fantasy storytelling and limited exploration, no amount of aesthetic shine can catch the eye for long enough to sustain investment," end quote. Incidentally, Austin is just wrapping up his review of this one, and he was not a fan. Much like myself, he was quite looking forward to this one, but it just didn't do it for him. That review will be up later this week, so if you'd like to know the minute that is live, be sure to subscribe and ding the notification bell. While Austin's been working on that, I've been working on Kunitsugami Path of the Goddess. I actually needed a bit of a break from Destiny since it's all I've been playing for nearly a month now, and let me tell you, this one really delivered. I loved this, I loved it a lot in fact. I don't think it's incredible, but it's beautifully composed and smartly tuned, and it's very earnest. It's hard to describe it briefly here, but it just feels a little bit special, and I really do like it a lot. It's great. I'll talk more about it later, but yeah, if you're on the fence, then please dive in. I promise you, you're going to enjoy it. yeah, it's great. I'm far from the only person who thinks this, by the way. The game currently sits at 88% very positive on Steam, and critics have it at a strong 80 on OpenCritic. IGN scored this one an 8, saying, quote, Kunitsugami Path of the Goddess is an exciting action strategy hybrid that left me yearning to know more about its inspirations and intricacies. The satisfying day-night structure of its stages evoked that overwhelming just one more thing feeling that easily had me losing track of time, and while it could occasionally be tainted by busy work-based management deeper in, the overall experience was a delightfully unique one, end quote. That Nintendo World Championships NES edition launched last week, and it landed kind of where I expected it to, which is in that kind of like 7 out of 10 zone. More than a few reviews commented that this just felt a little threadbare as a standalone box product, even one sold at a discount. Digital Trends put it well when they scored it a 3 out of 5 and said, quote, while I'll surely continue to chip away at my best times, Nintendo World Championships NES edition feels more like practice than a big game itself. It's a great way to learn the basics of speedrunning, but the outlet for those acquired skills is in another castle, end quote. My advice, maybe wait for this one to eventually end up on the Nintendo Online subscription service, since it does kind of feel destined for that at some point. And finally, Conscript is a game we've been tracking for a while now, an Aussie-made game from a solo developer, a PS1-style survival horror experience set in the trenches of World War I. Great visual style, a great premise, everything going for it, and it appears to have delivered. No user reviews out for this one at the time of writing, but critics have it at a strong 79. Press Start scored it an 8 and said, quote, it makes such an inspired decision in setting that everything else is icing on the cake, and even the stuff I don't adore still feels in service of what the developer is aiming to achieve in ratcheting the tension up several notches to create one of the most suffocating video games about war I've ever played, end quote. That's a cheap pickup, by the way. It's like $20, available on all platforms. A big congrats to the developer for a job well done. So what's coming out this week? Well, man, I'm not gonna lie to you, it is bleak out there. Not a lot dropping. Biggest release of the week is most likely gonna be Earth Defense Force 6, now finally hitting Western shores after launching in Japan back in 2022. It's definitely more Earth Defense Force than I expect it'll do, even better now thanks to Helldivers 2, which really put this sort of game on the map for a bunch of people who might not have otherwise taken interest in it. This one's headed to PlayStation and PC only, and it arrives tomorrow. A Ranger, a role-playing puzzle adventure, is a game that Lucy brought up in the podcast this week. Look forward to that episode going up on the channel over the weekend. A Ranger is basically old-school Zelda if it were also a grid-based puzzle game. Really tricky to explain without seeing it for yourself, but it looks very clever, and the art design is led by David Hellman, the person who did the classic Braid. Edge Magazine got an early copy of this one, and they scored it an impressive 9 out of 10. It's headed to PC, PS5, and also mobile, courtesy of Netflix. So if you have a Netflix subscription, this is included in that subscription. Not bad at all. VR peeps, an actual video game is releasing this week. Haters will say it's fake, but it's true. The game in question is called Thrasher, and no, it is not a skateboarding game. It's actually the next game from the people who made the absolutely fantastic Thumper, a visceral rhythm game from a few years back. Thrasher is a different game, but it still has the same rhythm focus, psychedelic visuals, and a banging soundtrack. This one will be a MetaQuest exclusive when it launches later this week, but in December, this one will also arrive on Steam. And final release for the week is... Tell you what, put this on your radar. I first saw Exhausted Man a few years back and immediately thought to myself, finally, a game that really gets me. Exhausted Man describes itself as a comedy puzzle game where you need to help a very, very tired person get through a crucial night. The biggest limitation? You are too tired to even stand, so you spend your entire time crawling around like some dorky carpet snake. Apparently you're like a software programmer or some shit and you need to debug while also being really tired. I'm sure any game developer watching this show knows that feeling. This just looks very silly, and honestly, I'm in the mood for that right now, so this works, and I was very happy to see that this one actually releases today on all platforms. At the very least, I do expect it'll make for some great TikTok fodder. Sort of free stuff time now, and much like the release list for the week, there really isn't much. In fact, the only thing on the docket is Epic, who right now are still giving away horror game Made of Skier and the excellent Arcade Paradise, but replacing those two tomorrow is the surprisingly excellent Fist Forged in Shadow Torch. This is a side-scrolling Metroidvania with some satisfying combat, some meaty Metroidvania progression, and some fantastic cyberpunk-inspired visuals. It's 88% very positive on Steam. It's a really solid game, definitely worth checking out if you haven't done so yet. Stop the presses! Late breaking news just as we were finalizing this episode. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, the one that released last year, is arriving on Game Pass today. That's pretty good, right? I mean, it's still a $70 game right now if you want to buy it, and it does have that campaign that you can play through, plus the multiplayer, of course. It's certainly not the most beloved entry in the series. I mean, it does sit at mostly negative 30% on Steam, but hey, it's on Game Pass, so you can just play the campaign for 7 or 8 hours and then you're done with it. That is available on Game Pass Console, Game Pass PC, and Game Pass Ultimate. For our feel-good story for the week, it feels right to turn our gaze towards EVO, an event that regularly produces absolutely insane, unmissable moments, and this year was no different. Highlight of the entire tournament has got to be Ryuji Hayashi, aka Hayao, and yes, that is his actual player portrait right there. He was playing for a top 6 Street Fighter 3 third strike spot, and he was playing his go-to, Hugo, a grappler who is by no means a top meta pick when it comes to third strike. Regardless, Hayao was making plays, and when he won a round, he liked to celebrate like this little running man dance here.
Oh, the running man!
Or the moment when he knew he'd won a round before the KO screen even appeared.
He already knows it! He's taking a walk! Bang!
However, I don't think anyone was prepared for what he pulled out next.
He's winning, Justin. He's winning.
It doesn't hurt? Oh my God! That hurts me, brother!
At this point, I would like to inform you that this man is 41 years old and he is still ranking in fighting game tournaments while doing the splits. This is what absolute peak performance looks like. To cap it all off, Hayao pulled out what was one of the best moments of the entire tournament, a play so good that is now being referred to as EVO Moment 38. Take a look.
Oh my God, no! Okay. Oh my God! How did he do that? He went past the SA3! He went for the roundhouse! He jumped over completely! Do you understand? That is a worthless button!
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, EVO at its absolute finest. I'd love to attend one of these one day, not as a competitor, mind you. I wouldn't make it past the registration before being laughed out of the building, but I always thought it'd be super fun to be part of that crowd. Either way, that's all I got for you this week. Always appreciate you stopping by. If you happen to have enjoyed yourself a little or a lot, then we'd love it if you could drop the video a like, help it spread far and wide across the algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe and ding that notification bell so you can come back next week and do it all over again. I'm off to play some Marvel Rivals now. That beta is available this week, and it's pretty easy to get into, so sign up if you're at all keen. Thanks again for watching, and a big thanks to this week's sponsor, NVIDIA. Interested in games like Stormgate, Throne and Liberty, Marvel Rivals, and Black Myth Wukong? If you answered yes to any of those, then you may want to check out what this video's sponsor NVIDIA is bringing to the table, because their GeForce RTX 40 series GPUs deliver super fast, super power performance thanks to not only their hardware, but also their advanced AI-enabled technology supporting it. It all starts with the hardware though. GeForce RTX
Whether it's a musical masterpiece or a beautifully crafted object, art and design is a human experience that almost everyone can appreciate. It has the power to invigorate you, reawaken dormant memories, or simply improve your quality of life. And this is exactly how artists and designers feel when their work isn't recognized. It takes time, effort, and a great deal of trial and error for creative people to make beautiful work. And it can be really discouraging when nobody cares about it. All of these creative achievements are nothing short of magic. These are all well-known masterpieces, but there are tens of thousands of other brilliant creative works that will never be heard, seen, or recognized. Why is there such a disparity between the creative cultural icons of our time and the artists and designers who are just as talented but remain overlooked? Why doesn't society value creativity? Creative people are some of the most mocked and disdained people in society, but also some of the most respected and celebrated, all at the same time. Our lives are significantly improved because of creative work. In this video, we'll cover the problems of creativity, and I'll tell you about some of the solutions that I've had success with. I'm not a world-famous designer or anything, but I am able to pick the types of clients that I want to work with, which is something that most creative people would be pretty happy with. The average person simply doesn't understand the amount of thought and consideration that goes into a creative masterpiece. This is David. It's an iconic and world-renowned sculpture made by Michelangelo. If you look at David's eyes up close, you'll notice that each eye is looking in two slightly different directions. His pupils are also hollowed out so that they cast darker shadows. This is not an accident. These visual tricks help to make David's stare look intense and alive. It looks a bit weird when you're zoomed in like this, but Michelangelo knew that people would be looking at the statue from a distance, and he took that into consideration. There are literally thousands of decisions like this made in every great creative work, whether it's a beautiful car design or a great piece of music or a beautiful sculpture. This is true mastery, but most people don't notice these nuances because they just don't care. In the modern world, convenience is king. The less we understand and the less we have to think, the more successful we are. If someone drives for us, we don't have to think about driving anymore. That's considered success. If someone cleans our house for us, that's success. If we don't have to think about the small details of our lives, that is the ultimate measure of success in the modern world. As a designer myself, pretty much my entire job is centered around not making you have to think when you're using a product that I make for you. All we care about is output and how it benefits us. And we're all the same, including you and me. We mindlessly scroll through Instagram and other social media sites and see amazing acts of skill and talent without even giving them 2 seconds of thought. When was the last time you actually sat down to watch movie credits roll through? Did you ever look at the visual effects teams? Did you ever look to see who that obscure actor was who had the little tiny role? You probably almost never do. None of us care because it's far easier to consume creative works than it is to reflect on them. But in the case of movies, at least the person is credited. In most cases, the designer or creator is never credited for their work. Nobody knows the people behind the original iPhone, for example. I mean, sure, you might know Steve Jobs or the head designer Johnny Ive, but what about the rest of the geniuses who made it happen? Speaking of geniuses, here are a couple of people who helped me make this video. Maybe you'll actually read through it this time, but I wouldn't blame you if you don't. And I'm not blaming anyone for this. The modern world is incredibly overwhelming, and we'd all go insane if we had to try and understand the nuance of every detail of everything. But it is a major reason why creative pursuits just aren't valued. It just takes too much time and effort, and it doesn't directly impact us. Our emphasis on convenience hides the inner workings of something, and we're actively discouraged from truly understanding and therefore appreciating great creative works. I think you can start to see how the details behind David's stare suddenly isn't really that valued to any of us. Those details are fundamental to creative work, but ultimately don't matter to us. And it bleeds into other aspects of creative production. Probably most importantly, creative pursuits are judged based on scale rather than quality or merit. Most of us don't know how to evaluate creative pursuits in any sort of conceptual, philosophical, or craftsmanship level. So we really only focus on 2 things: how much money it made and how many people know about it. Creativity can't be easily measured in any other way, and that's a big problem in commercial or corporate contexts. Even creatives themselves don't always know what's good or bad. There's the constant issue of never knowing if your work is actually good. There's a phenomenon known as the IKEA effect, where people are willing to spend 63% more on IKEA furniture that they assembled themselves, even if it's built the wrong way. We tend to love our own ideas more than other people's ideas, so it makes it really hard to evaluate the quality of your own work. I might consider this a spectacular masterpiece because my friend Jack and I made it when we were kids, but I'm not sure how much it's really worth to anybody else. With most other professional fields, you're solving a concrete problem. With design or art, that can be the case, but not always. There are lots of intangibles. Any new idea that you present, whether it's revolutionary or terrible, is going to get the same reaction: ridicule. Our default response to anything new that we don't know how to respond to is to mock it. It's so difficult to tell whether you're onto something big or you're wasting your time, which is a real issue with radical creative works. Even the iPhone, one of the most iconic product designs of our time, was never a guaranteed success. It's easy to look back on the original iPhone now and see why it would be successful, but it wasn't so clear when it first launched.
$500? That is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard.
It's likely that we'd value creativity and craftsmanship as a society if we were actually encouraged to understand it. It's not that surprising that creativity isn't valued, but it actually gets even more complicated. Solving an open-ended design problem or coming up with an artistic masterpiece is like trying to solve a puzzle, except all of the puzzle pieces are black. The puzzle has no beginning or end, and some of the pieces that are critically important to seeing the whole picture are hidden in weird places. Some are in couch cushions, some of the pieces are up in a tree, others are down by the beach. It's incredibly inefficient and slow and laborious. Creativity is really disorganized and non-linear. This is the absolute opposite of the way that successful businesses run. Businesses rely on organization and order. Like I said before, the biggest measure of success for creative work in modern society is around how much money it makes or how well well known it is. Creativity is incredibly difficult to make profitable because it's so unpredictable. Even if you do find that perfect design concept, the people commissioning your work will usually reject it. Mike in business development says it's an unproven idea. Karen from marketing says there's not enough sales data on it. It's not that they have bad intentions, it's just that they have different interests that are centered around making the company money in the safest way possible. So when a creative person sees a groundbreaking and novel idea, the administrators in the company just see a risky, unproven threat. But the thing is, great design and art is inherently polarizing. If everyone likes the work, it's probably not very good. When Michelangelo presented The Last Judgment, it was criticized for being too violent and having too much nudity. Michelangelo depicts himself right here. This sagging, deformed body is his self-portrait, and it represents the contempt he had for the patrons who commissioned him to do the work. This is pretty much exactly how I feel when I'm working with a really difficult client. And you can't blame the patrons and business people of the world, really. I mean, I know it's cool and edgy to say you want to disrupt the status quo or whatever, but you're not going to make friends by telling people that the thing that they've been doing with great success for 50 years is dumb. I mean, it's just not going to go well. An unproven idea is really, really risky. You can be cautious or you can be creative, but there's no such thing as a cautious creative. Failure is a huge part of creativity, but it's just not something that's tolerated in commercial settings. If you're a designer or an artist, think about how many ideas you come up with in a year that never actually make it past the concept phase. Thousands of thumbnail concepts and quick sketches or initial ideas get tossed in the garbage in search of something better. From a business standpoint, all of these early ideas are just inefficient failures, but from a creative standpoint, they are absolutely essential to getting to the final product. Because failure isn't really tolerated in commercial contexts, fear of failure tends to paralyze us all. And it's pretty much impossible to be creative if you're nervous or anxious. In fact, monetary incentives tend to be bad for coming up with creative ideas. According to 51 studies analyzed by the London School of Economics, financial incentives can result in a negative impact on overall performance. If you want to kill creativity, give people a reward for doing well. That's why it's been said that the Nobel Prize is the tombstone on all great creative work. So before I talk my way out of ever getting hired for design consulting work again, I do want to mention that you can employ processes and systems for design work to reduce risk. A lot of commercial creative work is done within the confines of a company's process, while showing little bits of risk here and there so you don't blow up the whole damn building. Most of my paid consulting work is centered around doing that. But at that point, I mean, is it really creative? In some ways, yes. I mean, I guess setting up new processes can be creative in its own way, but it's not likely to yield revolutionary results. It's more likely to yield incremental improvements, which in all honesty is usually what companies are after anyway. Most people who work as designers are actually just following a very constrained process to create somewhat predictable, proven results. Young designers and artists focus pretty much all of their time on improving their craft rather than understanding how businesses operate. So most of my time in design school was spent learning how to draw and make models rather than learning about how design fits into a larger business context. The main thing that gets me or you or any creative hired is their experience and expertise. But knowledge and experience is the enemy of creativity because you're already making many assumptions about how the project should work. It keeps us from seeing other decisions because we just go to the proven thing that worked in the past. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. I do this professionally all the time. This is the logical path if you're trying to be efficient after all. But I would argue that it's not very creative. The bottom line is that most professional work is about the bottom line. Are you making the company more money? If the answer is yes, figure out how to make a process out of it and do it over and over again. If not, you're fired. So brutal, but it's true. Companies and society say that they value innovation or divergent thinking, and companies may even have innovation programs, but very few of them will ever go through the insane risk of going past the idea phase. This is why most revolutionary creative work is done by people with nothing to lose. They're also usually outsiders. For example, Apple created the iPod after narrowly escaping bankruptcy. The movie Rocky was Sylvester Stallone's last-ditch effort to make it as a writer and an actor. Coco Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Kanye West, and many other rappers, every single one of these creative powerhouses started with no money, no prospects, and nothing to lose. There's plenty of spectacular creative work out there that was made by people who weren't desperate, but most people won't take that if they're already comfortable. Even if you do make a successful creative work,
why society hates creative
people. That's why there's like 7 rocket Rocky movies or whatever at this point.
Yo, Adrian. Yo, Adrian. Yo, Adrian. Yo, Adrian. Yo, Adrian. Hey, Adrian. Adrian.
Imagine if Sylvester Stallone tried to do a completely different style of film. Everyone would either ignore it or just be annoyed by it. Once people sort of see you as the guy who plays Rocky or Rambo, that's what they expect from you. It's not just external pressure either. Once you start to identify with a certain style or category, you kind of want to stick to it. Rodney Mullen, for example, he's one of the most creative skateboarders to ever live. He invented dozens of tricks and he changed the way we approach the craft forever. He won 35 out of 36 contests over 11 years.
Winning isn't the word I want at once. The rest of the time you're just defending and you get into this like turtle posture, you know? Where you're not doing it. It usurped the joy of what I love to do because I was no longer doing it to create and have fun. And when it died out from under me, that was one of the most liberating things because I could create.
Once these people have something to lose, they slip into comfort and stop innovating. It's what their audience wants, and it's the safe bet for them. Success and recognition can destroy your creativity. And I don't really blame any creative people for going this route. I mean, I even do this a lot in my own work. After working so hard and finally striking gold, it can be really tough to just walk away from a successful formula. I know I might sound like a real pessimist right now. There is a silver lining to all this, but in order to come up with a solution, you have to fully understand the problem. Creativity not being valued is not just society's fault. There's a dark side to creative industries, and creative people are often their own worst enemy. First, I want to talk about Milanote. They're today's sponsor, and it's a great tool for organizing creative projects. As I've mentioned throughout this video, creativity can be really messy and chaotic. Milanote is a tool that I use to organize my thoughts when doing creative projects. When I'm ready, I can share the board with other people and team members and clients.
I have a noise gate on. They can only hear what I
feedback, and we can collaborate more quickly. It's basically like the walls of a creative studio where everyone hangs up their work, except
they can't hear you guys.
It's really easy to start
the video. They can hear the jazz music. They can hear me, but they can't.
Designers, photographers, filmmakers, and artists. I actually used Milanote to organize some ideas that I had when making this video. I have a to-do list. Examples of this is the animators for the movie Life of Pi. Rhythm and Hue's studio was one of the most acclaimed animation and visual effects companies in the world, and Life of Pi was a worldwide blockbuster hit. But after Rhythm and Hue's studio won an Oscar for their work in Life of Pi, they had to declare bankruptcy. Creators have been beaten down so much by society, by their teachers, and themselves that they don't even see the value of their own work. They think it's normal to be able to do what they do because they're surrounded by it all day. I've had several instances where people try to give away design work to me for free, or they give it to me for an insanely low rate. To be fair, I don't know what their financial situation is. Maybe they're struggling to pay rent, so I want to be mindful of that. But please preserve the value of your expertise and get a side job rather than charge low rates for your creative work. There's no shame in that. There also isn't any real support system for creatives, at least not any sort of formal one. If you want to get feedback on your work or share it with other people, you're more than welcome to join my Discord, but otherwise, there's no clear path, unlike other fields like financial advisors, doctors, lawyers, etc., etc. If we take finance as an example, there are programs to set students up with jobs in big companies before they even graduate. It's also understood that recent graduates don't know very much, so they're mentored by senior members so that they can succeed. Meanwhile, the design and art path is just like, I don't know, man, try some art school and put yourself $100,000 in debt and hopefully it all works out. Designers not only have to be creative with the work that they do, they also need to be creative about how they make money from their skills. Established creative people tend to help the younger generation a lot less. It's a very zero-sum mentality. This is essentially rooted in a perceived scarcity of opportunities plus massive egos in design. Creative people know that their contribution to society is really hard to measure or quantify, so they build up a big ego in order to make it seem like they're someone important. They're actually encouraged to put other creative people's work down. The thinking is that if you say everyone else's work is bad, it must mean that you have high standards and your work is really good. Senior designers, please stop doing this. Lots of people see through it. The problem is even deeper than that, though. Most of the time,
you tell me what you're looking at.
And we know it. I'll give you an example from my own life. When I was in second grade, the teachers would give students these little yellow star stickers for good behavior lecture or completing an assignment or whatever else. The students would put the stickers on their desk as a sort of badge of honor, and the girl sitting across from me had like easily over 100 of them, all sort of in this neat little row. And almost all of the other students had a bunch of star stickers on their desks too. I think I had about 7. The person across from me had well over 100, and I had 7.
Look at all the stars you have. I'll never be that good.
That was a very clear visual indicator to me. Like, I just did not fit into this system, and most creative people don't either. Society wants you to be a good little worker bee, and most creative people are renegade killer bees. Creativity,
If you say so, Sama Dumps.
and a gift. You can't escape your own thoughts, and you want your ideas to be recognized, but a lot of the time, nobody cares. And that's not an easy thing to deal with. I know this sounds really negative, but I promise you'll be more optimistic by the end of the video. In order to address the problem, we need to understand it. Creativity isn't just forgotten in modern society, it's often maligned. Anytime you try to do something new or innovative, it's gonna be met with skepticism, ridicule, or even hostility. I mentioned this earlier in the video, but I wanna give you a specific example. My friend Rafi saw Prince live in concert in 1981. And at that time, Prince was an up-and-coming artist, but he wasn't nearly as famous as he is now. The audience didn't know what to make of him though. He was this androgynous black man wearing bikini briefs and a trench coat, singing really explicit sexual lyrics. And he was singing his own unique blend of funk, soul, rock, R&B, and people just didn't really know where to place him. Was he Rick James? Was he Jimi Hendrix? Why was he dressed like that? And when people get confused about something new and creative, they ridicule it. And that's exactly what happened. The audience turned on Prince. This is actual audio from the concert. What you're hearing is a stadium of 94,000 people booing at one man in bikini briefs. They were throwing food, bottles, and shoes at him, and I can't even imagine how disappointing that must have been for Prince. I mean, he probably thought this was gonna be his big break, a chance to show the world his music, and he comes to find that everybody—
If you can't tell yet, this is Gollum.
Most spectacular about this story,
Smeagol.
Prince had the conviction and the courage to move forward anyway. He went on to become one of the most iconic musicians in modern history. One thing that people forget about Prince is that in spite of his outrageous lyrics and weird fashion sense, he's actually an incredibly talented musician. He played every single instrument by himself on his debut album, and he's a virtuoso guitarist. I think it's important to mention that because he wasn't all just about shock value. The thing is, he was very talented. He was super talented, but not all creative people are necessarily talented. Another inherent issue of creativity is that there's really no barrier to entry. This can actually be a really good thing because it's accessible to anyone and anyone can engage in it. But it can be a problem because anyone can call themselves an artist or a designer. Other professions are different because they have licenses or some sort of formal training. If you don't know about medicine, you go to a doctor, the valued expert there. If you can't fix your toilet, you call a plumber. But art, design, music, I mean, almost everyone can do some kind of creative work at some basic level. That doesn't mean it's going to be good, but they can at least pick up a pencil and start drawing or bang on some drums or write a quick essay. Plus, everyone wants to be creative on at least some level. That makes the quality of creative work vary widely. Overabundance of creatives, along with serious lack of business training, drives the prices down for creative work. If two people call themselves designers, but one launched several successful products to the market, and another just started tinkering around in Photoshop a few months ago, they're both designers, sure, but one is far more skilled. But on paper, they look identical.
You make silly videos? That's cool. I'll check you out later.
Is what makes it exciting, but also exhausting. You just never know how your work is going to be received. There's a song called Losing My Edge by James Murphy of LCD Sound System. In the opening line, he speaks the word—
I'll check them out.
Losing my edge, the kids are coming up from behind, as you repeatedly get slapped in the face. What he's trying to communicate here is not exactly subtle. James feels beaten down and he's tired. At the time of writing this song, he's 37 years old and he's been trying to make it in the music industry for almost 20 years with no success. Every rejection is like a slap in the face. Younger, more talented artists are coming up from behind and he's just trudging through, tired as hell. Ironically, this is one song that helped catapult his career as one of the defining artists of the 2000s. This is another example of an artist who had nothing to lose, so he took the ultimate risk by putting himself out there. Now, to be fair, Prince and James Murphy are just two people out of millions who have tried to make it. Almost none of us will ever receive worldwide recognition or acclaim. So What's the silver lining here? First of all, presentation is everything. All great creatives understand showmanship, whether it's reviewing an object that's actually cake, an iPhone unboxing, or an Issey Miyake fashion show. Presentation is everything. These Issey Miyake dresses are really cool, but they wouldn't be nearly as cool if they were presented as just a normal runway show. If you're watching this, you might be struggling as a creative person. We all do. Becoming a designer is by far the hardest thing I've ever done. I've had teachers, especially design professors, tell me that I'm not good enough pretty much my entire life, and some of them even told me I should drop out because I was wasting the rest of the class's time. People would underestimate me, and they probably underestimate you too. I'm not a world-famous designer, and I probably never will be, but I have achieved a moderate level of success. I'm a design professor, I make these videos for you, I have enough client work to pick and choose the kinds of projects that I want to work on. Here's what I did, and maybe it'll help you. If you love your craft, just keep doing it. Don't stop. You can't control anything about how your work is perceived, but you can control the amount of work that you create. Here's another thing. A lot of people will make a design or a piece of art and sit around and wait for it to take off. Do not wait. You either actively improve on it or you move on to the next project. Don't overanalyze. Don't worry, just go back to work and find ways to do it better the next time. It will remove all of the anxiety you have around your lack of success. This also does two things. Number one, you're improving your craft, and number two, you're increasing your chances of someone recognizing your skills. You're a creator, and creators create. Just like Prince or LCD Sound System, you need to press forward. Every artist and designer struggles with doubt, even the biggest players in the industry. Think about how much we would have lost if Prince had stopped playing music after his terrible concert in 1981, or if James Murphy stopped recording albums before writing his song, Losing My Edge. It all boils down to courage. That's what my mentor Rafi tells me, and I agree with it 100%. I've come very close to quitting design entirely a few times, but every time I'm about to quit, I just go back to focusing on things that I find exciting and new, and somehow things just sort of fall into place. This YouTube channel is actually a great example of that. I never expected it to go anywhere when I first started it, but honestly, it's probably one of the best things I've ever done for my design work. If you're doing creative work for corporations or for money, you have to play by the rules of business. This video pretty clearly outlines the motivations of non-creative people and corporations. They want to reduce risk. So anytime you present creative work to an administrator, you have to look at it through that lens. If you do work for a client, it's likely that you have to compromise your vision in at least some way, and there isn't necessarily anything wrong with that. You should do what's best for your client or your patrons or your fans. Working for corporations can be really disappointing if you don't have another creative outlet. That's why I have my personal projects and my YouTube channel to experiment with new ideas that I wouldn't want to risk my clients' money on. It keeps me ahead of the curve and forces me to constantly be exploring new ideas. You should be doing the same thing. Explore different ways of presenting your work, explore different methods of execution, just try new things constantly. I'm not saying that you need to start a YouTube channel necessarily, but you should always be going back to what made you excited about your craft in the first place. Explore new ideas and share them with others. Experiment with sharing your work in different ways. You don't have to share it on a massive scale. Sometimes it's enough to just share it with a few close friends. It's worth mentioning that I'm not just a designer, I'm a musician as well, and I've never made any real money from being a musician. But I've learned a lot about myself, I've learned a lot about the world around me, and I've learned a lot about other people through making music. Becoming a musician was probably one of the most enriching experiences of my entire life. There's value in creation for its own sake. There's nothing more life-affirming and courageous than the choice to create. It's the choice to make the world a little bit better, even if it's just for one person. Never forget that your work matters, even if it only matters to you. My good friend Rafi and I are writing an entire book on this subject, so if you enjoyed this video, go click the link in the description if you want to get notified of when it gets published. Have a great day, everyone. I hope you learned something.
In 1998, at the Tokyo Fantastic International Film Festival, two men found themselves standing next to each other while queuing to see John Carpenter's Vampires. Now, unfortunately, there was a problem with the cinema's equipment, and so to pass the time, they struck up a conversation. and discovered that they had a considerable amount in common. They both worked in the video game industry. They were both writer-directors and had both been on a run of successful releases that were starting to pick up steam outside of Japan. As the hours passed by, they debated storytelling and direction, traded ideas about the films that inspired them, and even joked that they would one day create a game together. After 8 long hours standing outside the Shibuya Parthenon, the cinema finally opened its doors. But for both men, it wasn't the film that they'd waited for, but this chance encounter that would make the night so memorable. This is a story that was told by Konami's Hideo Kojima and Squaresoft's Yasumi Matsuno while giving an interview together in 1999. The two were talking about how important cinema was in the creation of their respective games, and jokingly used that night in Tokyo as an example of just how different they felt they were from the rest of the industry. Now, when talking about Hideo Kojima, that all goes without saying. The man has created some of the most captivating video games ever made, enjoys a legacy 3 decades long, and remains as relevant in high definition as he was back in the world of 16-bit graphics. He's a legend of the industry. But what about the other man in that anecdote? What about Yasumi Matsuno? In that very same interview, Kojima described him as someone who could push the industry to exciting new places, someone who shared his design DNA. And yet, as of 2023, Yasumi Matsuno hasn't written or directed a full console title in over 20 years. The sad tale of his career is one of the industry's greatest tragedies. But in order to understand how he fell from such lofty acclaim, we're going to have to explore the strange history of his final completed game, Vagrant Story. Just like its creator, Matsuno's console swan song was at one time considered one of the finest video games in its class, an exceptional achievement in fantasy storytelling, RPG system design, and cinematic art direction, the shining conclusion to Squaresoft's storied PlayStation 1 catalogue. And yet, again, just like its creator, it's endured 20 years of silence and neglect. Left behind while its siblings receive remake after remaster after remake, with any trace of its former glory found only in quiet whispers in some forgotten corner of the internet. Well, today our 2 protagonists will receive the redemption they deserve. This is the story of both Ashley Riot and Yasumi Matsuno, one in Tokyo and the other in Leamond, one wielding the pen and the other the sword, both desperately deserving of the acclamation that time and distance have stripped away. This is a lengthy Vagrant Story retrospective.